Welcome to the note presentation for Chapter 15, Section 1. Remember to fill in your notes for Chapter 15, Section 1 as you listen to this presentation. You may pause as needed to complete the notes, and you may also go back at any time to miss something or to get something that you may have missed already. So, we are talking about Chapter 15, which is Darwin's Theory of Evolution, and we're starting with Section 15.1, The Puzzle of Life's Diversity. The learning objective for this lesson, there's only one, and it is describe the pattern Darwin observed among organisms of the Galapagos Islands. So, we will look at those and we'll describe that pattern, and we'll talk about that piece at the end as well. Now, starting out with this, there's a couple things that we need to think about. The first thing you need to know is that evolution is the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. Now, it if you have a certain religious belief and you do not believe in evolution, this is not a religion class. This class is a biology class, and we are a science class, so we're looking at it from a science perspective. And from that perspective, evolution is something that has been proven. So, we will be talking about the evolution of modern organisms and how they come from ancient organisms and how they have evolved over time. The second thing you need to know about is about a theory. A scientific theory, for example, is a well supported, testable explanation of phenomena that have occurred in the natural world. You probably are already aware of that and have known what a theory is for a while, being that you've all had science classes before. But what you need to know during this section is the difference between the fact of evolution, it is a proven fact, and the theory of natural selection. And we'll talk about what that theory is as we go. All right, so once we start talking about Darwin and diversity, Darwin, who in 1831, he was 22 years old and he set sail from England aboard the HMS Beagle for a voyage around the world. And this voyage that he went on took him 5 years. And over the course of those 5 years, he went ashore and collected plant and animal specimens for his collection. And what he did with those is he studied those specimens. He read the latest scientific books when they were at sea, and he filled many, many notebooks with his observations and thoughts. Lots of drawings, lots of observations, lots of different notes about things. And he took that back with him and used those to create his theory of evolution. Now, this map here shows the voyage that he took. He started in Europe and went along this way, and they made several stops along the way. Every time they would stop, he would get off and kind of look for different things. And this one particular spot right here in the Galapagos Islands, this is where he made quite a few observations that kind of was really the basis for his theory of evolution. Came through this way, came back around through New Zealand, Australia, through the Indian Ocean, and this whole voyage, like I said, took 5 years from start to finish. So he was on a boat for the majority of 5 years, and they would spend a good chunks of time on land, also looking and observing and doing doing the tasks that they were out to do. But it took quite a long time to sail all the way around the world like that and get all of that information. So while he was doing this, um, he was really thinking mostly of science and how do all of these observations, how do they contribute to the field of science? And what happened is during his travels, Darwin made numerous observations and collected evidence that led him to propose a hypothesis about the way life changes over time. That hypothesis then became the theory of evolution, which we also know as the theory of natural selection. And we'll get more into that in the next section. So these are some things that Darwin observed when he was out. He observed that many plants and animals were well suited to the environments that they inhabited. They lived in certain places and they were very capable of surviving in whatever climate or environment they happened to live in. He was very impressed by the ways in which organisms survived and were able to produce offspring. But he was puzzled by where different species lived and did not. Why did certain species live in a certain spot but not in another? Why were they on one island but not on another? And those were some questions that he had as he went through. Another thing that Darwin looked for and collected were fossils. So not only was he looking for the living organisms, but he also collected and preserved the remains of ancient organisms called fossils. Some of these fossils resembled organisms that were still alive, while others looked completely unlike any creature he had ever seen before. So these were really helpful in developing his work as he went through as well. Now, this set of islands that we talked about, the Galapagos Islands, that are kind of off Ecuador, this is kind of what we know as Ecuador right here. So the Galapagos Islands here, these are a bunch of islands that are really quite close together. But what Darwin noticed and observed is that even though they're so close together, they had very different climates. So some were rainy, some were hot, some were cold, some were dry. So it was very interesting to me as to how these islands are so close together, but yet have very different climates. So our last key concept question here asks, what pattern did Darwin observe among organisms of the Galapagos Islands? And what he observed was that the characteristics of many animals and plants varied noticeably among the different islands of the Galapagos. So even though, again, those islands were so close together, the characteristics of the different plants and animals that were on the different islands were very different. He studied specifically tortoises and finches, which are a type of bird, and noticed some pretty interesting characteristics about the differences of those animals on those islands. So while he was making these observations, he started to wonder if animals living on different islands had once been members of the same species. They look very similar, they just have different characteristics. These separate species would have evolved from an original South American ancestor species. So he was thinking the possibility of these species that live on the Galapagos Islands originally at one time possibly came from Ecuador, where he found many of the same species, but they were very similar. So that's the end of this lesson. Here is the learning objective review for this lesson. And the question asks, what was the pattern Darwin observed during organisms of the Galapagos Islands? Now remember, this is not going to pop up on screen, so you're going to have to listen to what I have to say, and we just went over this not too long ago. And what Darwin observed were that the characteristics of many animals and plants varied noticeably among the different islands of the Galapagos. So that was the pattern, that the characteristics varied noticeably. Okay, so now that you are finished with your notes, make sure that you go back and get any answers that you weren't able to fill in as you go. And you'll want to get these ready to put in your interactive science notebook. And we will look at the next section coming up here in a little bit. Thanks for joining me. See ya.